Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone is having a very safe day. It's Saturday, of course. I hope you've been enjoying your weekend. There's a ton of stuff that's been happening throughout the world today. A lot of stuff in the geopolitical spectrum. Of course, a lot of stuff ongoing in Ukraine. Unfortunately, when it comes to the news, not a lot of this stuff is usually, nice stuff to talk about. We're talking about a lot of war and death and famine and drought and climate change and things that are relatively not enjoyable for anyone that has to participate or live through it. And so, luckily, there is a thing that we can do to give back. And if you check out the video description below, I would like to announce the fact that we have added 3 additional fundraisers in the description, as well as on our website and in our Discord. And we're constantly looking for more. We got 3 of those. We got 3 of the organizations that were sent to you vetted. All these organizations and all of these fundraisers, 80% or more of all of the proceeds go directly to the programs or whatever they are doing. One of which we added came to us from actually someone inside of Ukraine, and we were able to properly vet that and say, yes, this is indeed for a good fundraiser. This is indeed who he says he is and what he is doing. And so with that information, we were able to actually support that. That's not something we will be doing very often just because the limitations in trying to vet these individuals. But we were able to do at least one. They're trying to raise money for a vehicle. The other, so that way they can medevac individuals. Another one that we've ended up vetting was actually the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It was a little bit tough because some of that they were hitting below our numbers. We figured that one was working just fine. We'll go ahead and throw it in there. So go ahead and check them out as well. They support cancer research here in the United States, especially when it comes to children. And they have reportedly improved the survivability rate of child cancer patients from 20% when they initially started to now up to 80% or more. And they continue to improve upon that. Another one that we actually went ahead and vetted was also World Vision, which is a Christian humanitarian organization, and they actually support crises ongoing all over the world. And we're currently received another one that we're going through and we're vetting. We did not have time to vet that before tonight. We're going to go ahead and start into that immediately after this stream has ended and start getting through that process as well. So thank you guys for continuing to support us and especially supporting these organizations. Make sure to go and give them some love. They're trying to do amazing things. They're working all across the globe at all of these different crises. And you guys as the community, through these organizations, allow us to be the news that gives back. We want to be able to give back directly to the organizations that are supporting the very news topics we're talking about every single day. And you guys make that possible. So thank you. I can't thank you guys enough. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. The more people that come here, of course, the more people can enjoy the news. But most importantly, the more people that can enjoy the actual, more people that will be able to actually support these organizations, which is awesome. And in fact, we have so many organizations, we had to remove the descriptions on these organizations because it exceeded the description character limit. So fantastic work, guys. You guys have been an awesome community. And so with that, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on. We're going to go ahead and jump right into the news here, and we start off with our special report here in Ukraine. Before I get started, though, something that does happen, pretty frequently, but that I actually encourage is you guys ask questions. I do watch the chat while I'm here streaming, and I do want to answer your guys' questions to the best of my ability. Specifically to kind of give some accreditation to what I'm talking about. I served in the Marine Corps. I was an O-352 anti-tank missileman between 2016 and 2020. So I specialized in anti-armor warfare and the destruction of armored vehicles and armored doctrine. And I also did 2 tours over in the Middle East, specifically Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. So if you guys have any questions about general military stuff, especially kind of what's going on at the front lines, strategic, I'm not as good, but I try to have a good idea about it. But feel free to ask me. I'll answer to my best abilities, but I won't ever say I'm an expert other than the 2 things I've already stated. So just keep that in mind. And the first thing that we have here is actually here in Kyiv, and that is war crimes galore. When it comes to the Russian Federation, they have committed and perpetrated an immense amount of war crimes. and I do mean immense. So right here we can see, this is coming from the Prosecutor General's office, quote, "Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian troops have committed 23,370 war crimes against Ukraine and its citizens." War crimes is a word that gets thrown around quite a bit throughout this conflict, and a lot of the times it's misconstrued. People don't quite understand what a war crime really is. You have some general knowledge, just don't kill civilians and that kind of thing. But you have to understand the text and what you're reading when you're talking about customary international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions. There are 4 of them, along with 3 protocols that are in addition to them. And you have to kind of understand how that works. Civilians being in a location does not discredit the ability to strike it immediately. That's something to understand. There is an amount of collateral damage and loss of civilian life that is understood, with the inherent fact that warfare does cause destruction and damage and suffering to the local populations. And so with that, the Geneva Convention understands this. The point is to mitigate that. And what we see here with 23,000, quickly moving to 23,500 war crimes, you're talking about, that is not mitigation. That is not a mitigation on any part. That is what we would just consider a crime against humanity perpetrated by Russian forces. That's just because the wide scale of it means that there's no way, shape, or form in which case this is isolated incidents throughout the war. This is something that would be systematic. As we are going down here and continuing, there is a little bit of I'm trying to think of the word here. There's been some investigations going on here, and there's been a little bit of making sure that those who may have helped the Russians here are starting to get their dues, and that is because, as we take a look here, the Ukrainian SBU actually ended up arresting Oleksandr Kulinich, who was the head of the Crimean SBU, until he was sacked by President Zelensky at the start of the invasion. What did he do with the Crimean SBU, concerning Crimea was under Russian occupation? Well, not a whole lot, but it's the fact that he may have assisted, with whatever influence he does have within the region, he may have assisted Russian forces, and the fact that Russian forces were allowed to build up here, and that no really intelligence came out of Crimea through his sector of the SBU, has led him to actually being sacked at the beginning of the war, because nothing was told to President Zelensky about, the buildup of Russian forces out of here, which obviously led to the fall of Kherson. But also the fact that he is now considered, he may have been colluding with Russian forces, in which case he's currently being arrested under the charges of treason. And we can see that here. First of all, we have a nice, wonderful photo of him being arrested by the SBU here. Yes, legs fully apart, the proper way to conduct a search. And you actually see a video of his arrest here. So let's take a look. So no audio with this one, but he's being arrested. So, but that is Oleksandr Kulinich, who is the head of the Crimean SBU until he was sacked. And he's currently being arrested under charges of treason. And that starts letting us move our way here into the Donbass. The Donbass is really the major part of this conflict, but the first thing we stop by here is actually up here in Chuhiv. While for the most part, Russian forces have been pushed away from Kharkiv, it doesn't mean that they've been pushed away in their entirety. There is still Russian forces within the Kharkiv Oblast, and it's very important to understand this, especially as you go further south towards Izium and the rest of the Donbass. The amount of Russian forces within this region is rather significant, and not a lot of significant gains since that major counteroffensive took place have really occurred. The Ukrainian forces have pushed the Russian forces back far enough that Kharkiv is no longer at risk of bombardment from standard artillery weaponry, but we do know that they are being bombarded by anywhere from 6 to 8 ballistic missiles, Iskander-Ms specifically, that are being launched from the city of Belgorod to Kharkiv daily. right at the crack of dawn, as we had reported on yesterday. But here in Chuahiv, there is still a lot of, this is still a front line. It's still kinetic in some way, shape, or form. We're still seeing casualties as a result of this. This is coming from Oleksandr, who's the head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, and he has said, quote, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Chuahiv in the Kharkiv region on July 16th. 3 people were killed, 3 citizens were injured. Local residential buildings, a school, and a building store were damaged. The rescue operation is ongoing. We don't currently have any footage regarding this at this point in time, but we do have their statements. However, just as the Russians are dishing it out, the Ukrainians are giving it back, as we can see here. This is in Bilohorivka, where Ukrainian troops are making it rain. They're raining artillery shells here on the Russian forces, who have moved and put up positions in Bilohorivka. We know that they've been here for some time. We've seen Russian artillery batteries in Bilohorivka already, which have been destroyed, and we continue to see that here as Ukrainian forces are targeting Russian troops in and around the city of Bilohorivka, which at this point has been utterly destroyed by the war and is under complete Russian occupation. Just go ahead and take a look. Unfortunately, it does have copyright music, but as we can see here, we're targeting, looks like Russians, where they have put stockpiles and troops in some of these industrial buildings on the outside of town. There goes a Russian vehicle. But it looks like Ukrainian forces pushing in, at least to an extent, within this region. Now, this is still a front lines. There is still a lot going back and forth between the Ukrainians and the Russian forces, even though they haven't completely left out of the region, or even though the Luhansk region is still under complete Russian control at this point. It's still a front line, and they're both conducting some kind of kinetic operations on both sides. Go ahead and stop it here. And we know that just based off of the fact, you can think of this front line like a guitar string is probably the best way to describe it. Whenever you strike a guitar string or you pluck it, what happens is it vibrates. That's what causes the sound. And it's constantly, wiggling back and forth. And that's really what you can kind of describe. You can kind of describe the whole situation here in the Donbass. This front line is constantly just kind of wiggling back and forth. It's constantly vibrating and moving one side to another as small counterattacks are operating, back and forth, back and forth. The Russians are going to attack here. The Ukrainians are going to counterattack. They're going to launch an offensive. The Ukrainians will launch an offensive, and it's just a back and forth. It's a very fluid situation, meaning it's constantly changing and it's constantly evolving. As we move over here, kind of starting to work our way further into the southeast, we can see this is out over at Pokrovsk, where reportedly there was shelling that occurred here as a result of Russian bombardment. Russians have been hitting these areas relatively frequently throughout this war. This could be a possible continuation of softening up resistance. This is more than likely not that case scenario. We do know that they are softening up resistance in areas like Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Bakhmut, and the surrounding areas such as Chazov Yar and Krasnivka. But over here, it would seem less. But nonetheless, it was shelled by Russian forces. We do not have a whole lot. They did say that there were injuries, but they didn't explain numbers. They just said that homes were damaged and that there were injuries amongst civilians. And this is the mayor of Pokrov here in the bottom right-hand corner with the images of what's been happening in the city here, taking up the main screen. Take a look. And we do get regular updates pretty much from all of the mayors who are under the bombardments of the Russian forces. That's it's either the regional military administration, which just means it's the governor of that oblast, or it is the mayors themselves, which would be the city military administration, which they have just been deputized into military service essentially as being the leader of their individual towns. And that's kind of how the makeup of these regions are. As we jump down here into Marinca, we see incendiary munitions usage once again. Incendiary munitions aren't inherently banned by the Geneva Convention. However, there are different ways to use them, and we don't see any of that taking place here. What we do see is that incendiary munitions are being used in and around large concentrations of civilian populations, which breaks Protocol 3 of the Geneva Convention, of the 4th Geneva Convention specifically. And it also, if it's being used against military personnel, just their personnel themselves, not an ammunition depot or a logistical hub, then what that incurs is a war crime under the customary international humanitarian law, where you cannot use incendiary munitions against personnel. This is something that has been pretty well documented in the past. If you take a look at incidents in Iraq and Afghanistan where individuals that were operating mortar and artillery systems loaded white phosphorus, which is also known as Willy Pete, and that is used to create smoke screens. But what it is, it's also white phosphorus burns at several thousands degrees Fahrenheit and burns individuals. And they did what would be called a shake and bake, where you shake them up with HE, and once they come out, you burn them alive with white phosphorus. And those people have been prosecuted for war crimes and are currently sitting at Fort Leavenworth. We see this happen quite frequently. The Russians are doing a very similar thing, and unfortunately, this wouldn't be the first time, but we do see this occurring. Take a look. So I don't think so. Someone just asked. JL just asked, "Is this phosphorus?" No, I don't think this is phosphorus. Um, it could be. It could just be in a different pattern. The way I'm used to seeing white phosphorus being used is normally in like it normally gets dropped over an area and it creates a very distinct smoke screen. It billows this really bright white smoke. It's very nauseous and it's very toxic, but we still use it as a smoke screen for artillery and mortars. But I've never seen it in this way. Um, I've never seen white phosphorus be like act in this manner anytime I've been around artillery or mortar fire that dropped white phosphorus. Never seen it act like this. This seems like I believe the Russians have their own munition. And Erevich Chang says, does this mean that they explode in midair and then land on their targets? Yes, that is exactly what's happening. So the way it works is you actually have to set the fuse for a mortar or artillery round. And you have to do this manually. It's something that has to be done every single time you prep a round. And you can get different effects with different types of munitions when you do this. One of the effects you can get is where you do an air burst, and that's where you time it to roughly explode 25-ish meters above the ground, I believe is what it is. It's about 3 seconds before impact or 2 seconds before impact. And what this does is it now spreads. If it's an HE shell, it shoots out shrapnel everywhere. And it's perfect for basically being like a shrapnel shot. If it was an old 18th century cannon, it would basically be like a shrapnel shot where it basically lands and it spreads out. It has a much larger blast radius and effect area. And it actually will kill personnel doing that. We've seen that done in this war too, but you can do that with things like you have to do that with things like flare rounds. Whenever you're firing flares at night, you do the same thing. You have to time it to explode over a target. That way, you have enough hang time, and that burns long enough for you to have light in and around an area with flares, and they're doing the exact same thing here with incendiary munitions. You see the canisters, they detonate beforehand, before they reach the ground, and this means that they spread out and they cover a much larger area than if they were a direct impact, and this will cause larger fires over an area and also cover more personnel if they're using it against personnel, which seems to be the case. We saw a very similar situation where they're using them against Ukrainian trenches against personnel in Ukrainian trenches in the area of Popasna shortly after they killed a bunch of Wagner Group guys there at the beginning of the war in the Donbass. And when it comes to those fires, they do rage, and there's no way to put them out. You can see here some of those flames that are burning currently as a result of this strike, reportedly. We can't confirm these independently at this point, but it would appear that is the case. There is a large amount of fires within the region, suggesting that those did indeed set fire to at least the local landscape, if not several buildings in the chance. There's a point at which you can use these munitions. You can use them against military targets. It is specifically same thing with napalm and flamethrowers. The objective with them, though, is to destroy ordnance and fuel and stuff like that. You use them against ammo depots, and you use them against fuel depots and stuff like that. You can't use them against personnel, and that's really the difference. White phosphorus and incendiary munitions are especially terrible. There's really no way to put them out, and it basically will just melt right through you as a person. It's absolutely inhumane. It's beyond inhumane, and it is nothing but suffering. There's no way to put it out. They burn at thousands of degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius. It really doesn't matter at that point how hot it burns. It will burn forever until it burns itself out and uses all of the chemical reaction. As you see here, the fighting rages on in the Donbass, though, and that's because we can see here where Ukrainian forces actually destroyed a T-80. This actually took me some time to identify because there's not a lot of clear identification features on it. But we were able to finally identify this. It is a T-80 that's serving here somewhere in the Donbass. We don't have a specific location, but it has been effectively destroyed by Ukrainian forces. And if anyone knows the YouTuber Ryan Macbeth, he would be especially interested about these kill rings on the front of it. Ryan Macbeth is also another YouTuber on here, but he's very, very knowledgeable in what he does. He was an O3, or he was the U.S. Army equivalent, from my understanding, of my job, but he did it for like 20 years. I did it for 4. And he was a little bit before my time. But he's very good. I highly recommend checking him out. He's very knowledgeable in what he's talking about. He's very, very good at what he does. But anyway, going down here into Mariupol, we see Russian equipment is on the move. The Russian equipment is reportedly on the move here in Mariupol, headed towards Zaporizhzhia Oblast. According to local sources, they said over 100 pieces of equipment had been moving throughout the city to just today. So quite an extensive amount. The Russians pulling from here makes sense. They do still have a pretty extensive amount of forces within this area. Not all of them have moved out, and we're going to see more of them moving as they reconcentrate their forces into main and supporting efforts. And we should continue to see that as they're trying to bolster their forces here at the front lines and trying to make some kind of an offensive gain, ahead of just the Luhansk region. We can see that here. Oh, there it goes. So it's just a video of equipment moving through this region. Looks like BMDs. That's kind of hard to tell. It might be a BMP. I think those are BMPs. Yeah. So we do know that there is equipment on the move, and we do know that that is headed for the Zaporizhia Oblast, at least according to local sources. So jump up here into the Dnipro Oblast, or Dniprovetsk Oblast. We can see that another missile was shot down. In fact, several. According to Mykola Lukashuk, who is the head of the Dniprovetsk Regional Council, on July 16th, Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shot down 3 Russian cruise missiles in the Dniprovetsk region. And we do have a video of at least one of the shootdowns. So pretty crazy. They do continue to fire ballistic missiles. In fact, they just hit Dnipro yesterday with ballistic and cruise missiles, and we continue to see that they hit Venetia, which is obviously on everyone's minds right now. They have hit Dnipro, and they hit Kremenchuk, they hit Kramatorsk once again, and we're going to continue seeing that. They hit Kharkiv every single day, several times over. So. Pretty extensive nonetheless. And that actually brings us into Odessa, which is going to be the end of the Ukraine segment here. And this is the news story of the night. Russian ballistic and cruise missiles struck Odessa today. They were not able to be intercepted. And at this point, there's very little information. There are censorship laws inside of Odessa. We know this, and the reason for this is because they're trying to limit the amount of adjustment that Russian forces can do with real-time information coming off of social media, which social media, everyone was laughing at the beginning of the war about how TikTok is not a reliable source. We live in a world now where everyone has a cell phone. When I was in Syria, people couldn't feed themselves, but damn it if they didn't have a smartphone with a camera. And so we get to see this stuff in real time as it's happening, and this proves as an information goldmine. This means that you can adjust your fires. We've seen multiple times where both sides on this conflict have struck at targets based off of social media where they geolocated it. And we continue to see that here. So that's why a lot of this stuff is either going to be blocked out or it's going to be much later in the day when it's reported after the strikes are over and it's no longer strategically viable for adjustment. And we can see that here. At this point, the casualties are unknown, but it has caused a large fire within the city. I'll go ahead and take a look. Alrighty, so that is the damage out of Odessa right now. Likely it was struck by caliber cruise missiles fired by submarines of the Black Sea Fleet coming out of Sevastopol. We know that surface vessels are no longer viable, really, for the Russian forces. That wasn't really viable after they were after the sinking of the Moskva. And so someone is asking, was it some JL said, was it some ammo depot that was struck? There's a lot of fire and dark smoke there. I don't think so. So if you've looked at previous footage that we've shown here of ammunition depots, we see what happens is called a cook-off, or also known as a sympathetic detonation. And what this is the other ammunition, either through the explosion itself or the fire, actually heats up to the point that the propellant or the charge inside of these detonates on its own. And that causes an extensive amount of damage, but you would see live rounds shooting in all sorts of directions. Artillery shells and anything else stored in there would be detonating right now if it was a fire. So that rules out the ammo depot. We know this isn't an ammo depot because there's no cook-off ongoing right now. And so what we can say is likely what this would have been is, judging by the black smoke, and it is pretty dark, heavy black smoke. This isn't a definite. Now keep this in mind, this is not a definite, but it's a good characteristic of what we would call an oil or a fuel fire. Which means this is, and we know that there is a lot of fuel and oil depots around Odessa that have been struck before by Russian forces. Whenever you see a vehicle that's burning, the oils and the hydraulic fluid and everything else burning inside of the vehicle causes this very thick black smoke to be coming off of it, as you saw when we take a look at the T-80 that was destroyed. And this is likely a very similar case. This may have been a storage point for fuel or oil. It was struck by Russian forces. It makes sense. There are refineries for fuel and oil just outside of Odessa that they would be storing some in this location, and therefore it's producing a very thick, heavy black smoke coming out from that warehouse. I can't say that for sure. There are other things that will cause that black smoke. Rubber, for instance, will cause the very thick black smoke. It could have been a tire. It could have been a tire factory, for all I know, or rubber factory, but it's a good indicator, and there are some things to it's a good guesstimate of what could have been hit here based off of what we've seen them hit in the past, what we know is around Odessa, and what would be critical for the war, and that would be fuel and oil, and we can rule out the ammo depot. But that is it for everything inside of Ukraine at this point. There's a ton of stuff, obviously. There's a lot of back and forth when it comes to artillery, but that's really the characteristic of this war, is large-scale artillery bombardments, and it's a lot of rocket attacks, missile attacks, especially on the side of the Russian Federation. In fact, we know the Russian Federation have fired over 630 ballistic and cruise missiles during the course of the war thus far, and that's at least coming from the Ukrainian side, and we see that just in the amount of strikes that have been conducted. They still are continuing to strike major civilian infrastructure and high concentration civilian targets. That is a war crime in and of itself, and we know it has to be systematic considering how often it's happening. There are no further updates regarding the situation in Odessa. Unfortunately, it would appear that over 117 people were injured and sought medical treatment, and 24 people ultimately have lost their lives as a result of that blast. We also are kind of in the same boat when it comes to Dnipro. We know that several have lost their lives there, at least 4, with many others being injured. So ultimately, we're just seeing a lot of attacks on major civilian populations. Not really different from any other point in the war, but it's just the footage that we're seeing at this point is a lot more heart-wrenching, unfortunately. And it's only getting worse. It's not getting any better. As we move in here into the international news, we have a couple of different news stories coming out of Russia tonight. The first thing is an opinion piece, more or less, or a historical opinion piece from RIA News. And I thought this was very interesting. Normally, this doesn't have anything really to do with a new topic of the day, but it was released by RIA News today. And I thought this would be something worth addressing. So what RIA News has done is they have posted an article about how the RVIO recalled how the Allies abandoned the USSR during the Battle of Stalingrad exactly 80 years ago. The Battle of Stalingrad began today. This is one of the largest battles of World War II in scope and duration and the number of participants. And they talk, and their damnation for the Allies for not helping with the Battle of Stalingrad is the fact that the President Roosevelt, congratulations, President Roosevelt stated that they would have an Allied offensive in Europe by June of 1942. Well, and they say it didn't happen. It didn't happen until 1944 to bring a separate front on. That's their, that was their reasoning for this. That's why they say they abandoned them. When the fact is that Russia, the Soviet Union wouldn't be able to fight Stalingrad without the Allies. So that is the situation. They're saying, the Western powers traded blood, the Russian blood for time. And the fact is, the invasion of Normandy, the invasion of Normandy in 1944, Operation Overlord, is so immense. It's so large in its scope and scale. It's the largest amphibious operation ever conducted in history, and up until that time, I should say. And it's huge, and that takes a lot of time. The U.S. has just entered the war at this point. The U.S. has just now entered the war. They entered it in December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and they officially declared war on the 8th. And this is also the only time that Germany ever declares war against another power officially, even though they really didn't have to. The Lend-Lease Act gave steel, oil, and vehicles and supplies to the Russians to allow them to conduct any kinds of offensives, including the encirclement at the Battle of Stalingrad. So that wouldn't have been possible. The Russians wouldn't have had the steel to build a stupid amount of T-34s, because they didn't have the industrial capacity to do so if it weren't for the Lend-Lease Act. They also wouldn't have been able to fuel the vehicles because they didn't have enough trucks to begin with, and all of the trucks they did have were basically from World War I. The entire Soviet army essentially was completely obliterated in any mechanized form when they put their BT series tanks and their T-26s up against the Panzers during Operation Barbarossa in 1941, and that completely collapsed the Russian cause there. And it wasn't until the Lend-Lease Act and they started getting all of these supplies, in which thousands of Allied sailors died at the U-boat threat trying to get these supplies just to Russia. So no one abandoned them. And also, we were fighting in 1942. In fact, you're talking about Operation Torch. You're also talking about Sicily. You're talking about Salerno in 42. You're talking about Sicily. You're talking about Italy. So there was a war in Western Europe. There was an offensive in Western Europe. I'm sorry it wasn't Normandy that didn't come until 44. That really changed the course of the war. So, did we abandon the USSR during the Battle of Stalingrad? Nobody abandoned the USSR. I hate to break it to you, Russia. You're just a bunch of... This is trying to rewrite World War II, or also known as the Great Patriotic War if you're in Russia, and that's just not how it works. And we've seen this before in rhetoric anyway. And Ukraine destroyed 30 homes, once again coming from RIA News. RIA News, by the way, is a state-run government news channel. To keep that in mind. There are several of them. It's really the... fake, you have a fake choice. You have the fake ability to choose what you watch. When it comes to Russia and news media, there is no independent media. It's all run by the state. Just like how your cars are now going to be manufactured by the state as well, with Lada now being reacquired by the Russian Federation. And what they say here is Ukrainian forces destroyed more than 30 homes in Stakhanov, which is also known as Kadivka. However, the issue with that, and they're talking about civilian casualties with all this. The issue with that is they say, they hit it with HIMARS and they destroyed more than 30 houses. The problem is that Ukrainians did not destroy 30 houses. I have no doubt 30 houses were destroyed in this incident. I'm just saying it wasn't the Ukrainians who did it, because we actually have the footage of that night. We have this footage. I pulled it from last night's stream, in which case we captured what happened in Kadivka. This strike was on a Russian ammunition depot, and this is the footage of the, and this is what I mean, this is the ammunition from that strike cooking off, which 100% probably is what destroyed these houses, if 30 were destroyed. This is why you do not put military targets in a high concentration civilian population. They said the same thing about Novokhovka, except they say that they kept saltpeter here. There was a lot of 152 millimeter canisters, if you can get that joke, of saltpeter sitting in Novokhovka, as we saw in footage after that. And we can clearly see here ammunition cooking off, and this certainly would have been a detriment and a danger to any civilians living here. But it's a necessary evil to destroy these things and possibly kill your own citizens, because ultimately, if you kill a few dozen, that's much better than having these things fired at Bakhmut or any other locations along this front and killing hundreds. That's the sacrifice and the decision Ukraine has to make, and this is the strike that they're talking about. This video goes on for 2 minutes and 20 seconds of cook-off. That's an ammunition depot if I ever saw one. And that is what would have killed, would have killed Ukrainians in this city. That right there. Because the fact is, HIMARS is so accurate, it will put a missile on target within 1 meter of its target. It will put the missile within 1 meter of whatever you hit. That's between me and my microphone. And I hope you guys can hear me pretty clearly. That's insane. That is what we're talking about on accuracy. Russia can't possibly, fathom the accuracy of these weapon systems because they have nothing comparable. Russian weapon systems are accurate within hundreds of meters, not within meter. So it's insane. Edward Chang says, I think that Ukraine would tell their citizens to leave before striking in a populated area, is correct? They would try to. So it's under the Geneva Convention. You have to attempt to warn a civilian population if you're about to conduct a strike in a location, if feasible. The problem is that if feasible is not usually a capability during the war, especially considering how bad things are between Ukrainian and Russians. So it's, Aravis Chang, yes, ammunition depots exploding are very spicy fireworks. And as you can see, the thing is, it's not like if these rounds were in a weapon system where they're just going to go in one direction. If you saw, there is one that flies over here and immediately does a U-turn and slams into the other side, right back into the middle of the rest. Why is it doing something like that? There's no way for it to fire in a trajectory. These things are going off in any which random direction, and they're going to do whatever they want. They're not being guided. They're not being aimed in any which way. They're not being contained. a round goes in a chamber, a rocket or a missile goes in a tube. All of these things are to be able to point in which direction these things are going to go towards. Unfortunately, when you're sitting there in a stockpile, that's not what's going to happen. They're going to go wherever they wish. They're not even generally aimed in an area, and this is a detriment and a danger to civilian populations. Unfortunately, that means that loss of civilian life. We know that in the Kherson Oblast, with the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the Ukrainian forces did tell Ukrainian citizens they needed to leave if they wished to not be caught up in the middle of what they were getting ready to do. And a lot of people did end up heeding that warning as best they could, making the journey on foot in most cases. But unfortunately, that's not possible in every area of the war. And with a 2,500 kilometer front line, which is the equivalent of going from Moscow to Barcelona, that's not possible in all areas. And unfortunately, it's just not feasible with how the Russians act in this war. And so, unfortunately, they probably weren't able to warn the civilians in Kadivka that they were getting ready to conduct the strike. That would have also allowed time for the military target to have been moved, and therefore the strike no longer be possible, which means that those weapons and that ordnance is still a detriment to the civilians regardless. JLS, is it possible for the damage to reach a few kilometers because of that, even if a fireball is not so big? Yes. So the ordnance being used is, you're talking, most of this is artillery rounds. These are artillery rounds that are being used. And these things are meant to fire for miles. I mean, they got the ordnance behind them. Now, generally speaking, hitting them, the thing about cities is it's good and bad. Cities mean that there's a lot of people around, but infrastructure means that the damage is somewhat contained. The cities are really good at containing explosions and damage radiuses, even with larger weaponry. And so, as we can see, there's high rises and stuff all around this area. That's kind of containing the blast. It's keeping it localized. So before they have a chance to go far off into the distance, they're hitting wood lines, they're hitting buildings, they're hitting this, that, and the other, and it's blocking their paths, so they're not traveling kilometers. Now, if it was just an open field, certainly they'd be able to do that distance. It's just like if you were to miss your shot out while hunting and accidentally hit someone's house with it. It's a similar kind of idea, except this stuff isn't contained and there's nobody aiming it. It's just exploding and going off and being shot off in any direction. So that is the Russian rhetoric regarding the strike in Kadivka. Obviously, they're wrong. We have the footage to prove it. That's not the only thing happening in Russia. There is a little bit of something different here, and that's because a freight train derailed here in the Tula Oblast. At least one person died as a result of this, but however, there's no more information regarding the cause of what actually caused this to derail. As you can see here, the full train did end up derailing. And that allows us to start moving into Europe, where we jump up here into Latvia. Latvia has ratified NATO accession for both Sweden and Finland, giving them yet another step closer to joining the NATO alliance. This comes as the states are currently ratifying Finland and Sweden to join the NATO alliance, making them the 31st and 32nd members of the alliance together. And we can see those signatures there. As we jump down here into the south, North Macedonia is getting ready to begin their negotiations to join the EU once again, which these will begin on July the 19th. This is because their parliament passed a proposal, which was given to them by the French President Macron, that ends disputes between Bulgaria and other Baltic countries that were really preventing their EU candidate status over the last 3 years. Similar with Albania. Albania is now going to be able to join the European Union because of this, and so they will be having those negotiations together. It's really their final barrier to really begin those negotiations. So it's a very big deal for both North Macedonia and Albania. And unfortunately, as we jump down here, this is in Paleokori, which is in Greece, It's a very small village here in Greece. If we jump down here and zoom in. But unfortunately, a Ukrainian cargo plane crashed just outside of the city. There were no passengers aboard, but the cargo aircraft was attempting to conduct an emergency landing. It had called for an emergency landing, but was not able to make it to its destination. We currently don't know, as firefighters and emergency workers are currently at the scene, the cause or anything else, as the investigation has just started. However, what we do know is that the aircraft was heading from Serbia to Jordan. It was an Antonov aircraft. We don't know what was on board, but it is unfortunate. The aircraft did not land in amongst any homes, so there were no collaterals. And that starts to bring us here into the Middle East, where unfortunately, according to the UN Special Envoy, to Syria, they are no longer. They said that the talks in Vienna for diplomacy and constitutional changes that were planned in Geneva for 25th and to 29th of July are no longer possible due to conflicts in the parties included. We do have their official statement regarding the special envoy, so we can see that here. Statement on behalf of the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Mr. Geir O. Peterson. And this is coming from today. The United Nations Special Envoy to Syria, Mr. Guillermo Peterson, regrets that holding the 9th session of a small body of Syrian-led, Syrian-owned, UN-facilitated Constitutional Committee in Geneva from 25th to 29th July 2022 is no longer possible. Letters have been sent to all members of the small body informing them of the same. The Special Envoy stresses the importance of all stakeholders in this conflict, protecting and firewalling the Syrian political process from their differences elsewhere in the world, and encourages them to engage in constructive diplomacy on Syria. The Special Envoy will continue to consult with all relevant parties and provide more information in due course. So that's a major step back regarding the political affairs within Syria and the ongoing conflict still raging throughout the country and has been raging since 2014. It's not the only news coming out of the Middle East. Down here in Rita, we can see that the Jeddah summit is currently underway. President Joe Biden did fly into this location, as well as representatives from the rest of the Middle East. The Jeddah Security Summit is a meeting of the minds and really the leaders of the Arab world and the Middle East. And what they are doing is they're currently trying to set aside differences and bring about some kind of peace and stability and general security, mutual security understanding here in the Middle East in order to prevent further clashes, continual war, and try to provide better security stability within these regions, especially in the course of of what's going on in Yemen, and also as aggression from Iran continues to increase there along their very own borders. The representatives include from Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, the United States, Israel, Iraq. So it's quite an extensive amount of individuals, and some of the stuff that is coming out of this has already been released. Reportedly, Saudi Arabia stated that they will be pushing more oil into the global market to drive down those costs for oil and gas in the world, and also they reportedly stated that they will be allowing flights between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would be a historic first for them. It would be a major development in opening up some relations between the two nations, and also kind of extending some of those security guarantees overall, as they were kind of at odds before, as they are in many ways. But hopefully this opens up some changes here in the Middle East, and hopefully we continue to see further developments with this that really improve quality of life. As we jump down here, actually just off the coast of India, heading towards Sri Lanka right now, 44,000 metric tons of fertilizer is being given to Sri Lanka. The reason for this is specifically 44,000 metric tons of urea, which is part of a aid package. There's $55 million line of credit given from India to Sri Lanka in order to purchase some of this stuff. This is the equivalent of $5 million US dollars specifically. And this is because part of the issue with Sri Lanka is the fact that a lot of the subsidies and a lot of the fertilizer subsidies that were given to farmers in Sri Lanka meant that they were unable to grow, or those were cut. And so they weren't getting the fertilizer they needed to. It wasn't being imported by their government. They aren't able to feed the people because they don't have enough fertilizer, and their crop yields are being lowered by this. So this is a major issue for them. Getting this, it will improve crop yields and ultimately help bringing the nation back onto its feet. It's just one of many things that they're currently trying to do for Sri Lanka to really restabilize this before it continues to destabilize the rest of the region. And hopefully we will see more of this, but we can go ahead and check this out here. This is coming from the official government of India. This is the Indian embassy here in Sri Lanka. It's just a short video sent by posted by the Indian embassy here in Sri Lanka. And India has been providing a lot of support to Sri Lanka in order to improve the quality of life here and try to restabilize this region. Unfortunately, it's not always possible considering that their government just essentially collapsed along with their economy. But hopefully a new government will be in power soon and they'll be able to reorganize the government, start making some of the very, very much needed reforms in Sri Lanka, and hopefully get the country's economy back on its feet. But unfortunately, that will take some time. But in the meantime, at least they have local neighbors there willing to help and continue to send aid to that nation. As we jump down here into Africa, the first thing we have is a little bit of a different news than we normally have in Africa, and that's because Botswana and Rwanda actually signed a development treaty. This is specifically a treaty of agricultural and livestock development to further the developments of both of their nations. Rwanda, this happened here in Ethiopia at the African Union. So the two nations are, they are still considered developing nations. They need to do a lot of things in order to help them and kind of build up their economies. And a lot of that, unfortunately, a lot of that currently is economic or is agricultural in order to build up those economies. So this is a pretty major deal for them both. I mean, you can take a look here where both signatories did end up signing that between the two nations. So a little bit different news than what we normally have, but luckily we're getting that from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Rwanda. Down here in Beni, which is the capital of the North Kivu region within the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Islamic State conducted another attack here in the DRC on another prison, but this time military forces were there already and actually began to repel the assault. The terrorists did launch the attack on the night or last night, and early this morning. They ran into the resistance of the military, but they still managed to dislodge some of those forces and burn down some of the shelters for the the security forces. They did fail to move towards their goal and were forced to retreat. The city authorities also noted a significant role in the defense was played by young people who promptly came to the aid of the military personnel and assisted them in the fight. No injuries at this point are reported, but the Islamic State did release a set of photos from the engagement. And up here, the UN ended up patrolling Kembe and the local region and the local surrounding region after it was reported by local media that militants had taken control of Kembe and some of the surrounding area. The UN forces, which are operating under the MINUSCA mission, are currently reported that there were no armed groups within the region, and the area was relatively stable and calm. And this is coming directly from the United Nations, specifically their mission for MINUSCA. And as we jump down over here into North America, the United Nations has released a report regarding bigotry on social media, specifically regarding Holocaust denial. And I thought this was important because this is something that we have talked about here on the channel before. So the United Nations released a report regarding the denial, saying that 1 in 5 social media posts either distorts or completely rejects the facts of the Holocaust or that it even occurred. And that's coming from the UNESCO report. And what was said by Antonio Gutierrez here is, we must never forget how easily hate speech can turn into hate crime, how ignorance or indifference can lead to intolerance, or how silence in the face of bigotry is complicity. And that's coming from Antonio Gutierrez, who tweeted that out officially today. That was his response regarding this report. And this is their official report on this, and it's quite extensive. It's quite large, what they went through to get some of this information and to really put this all together. But this really shows a problem with our societies. And the problem is that, especially when we're talking about Russia, for instance, the fact that history isn't being taught, it's trying to be rewritten. The unfortunate fact of life is that humanity has done some absolutely horrendous things. We have done some absolutely horrendous things as people. And it's, like the Holocaust, slavery, human trafficking, war. I mean, it's terrible. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, religious persecution, anti-Semitism. Like, we've done really terrible things. And that's something that we want to keep free on this channel. We don't want to have any of that on this channel. There are many people who have very openly stated, even here on YouTube and on other platforms, hatred for Russians and really hating Russian people, especially in the face of this. And I have stated multiple times that I do not want to ever compare these people to things like rats, or in the thing when it comes to Russia, I've heard them compared to rats before, and animals when they're fighting over food and stuff at their grocery stores because of the sanctions. Or we're calling the Russian troops orcs, or we're calling somebody a Nazi, or whatever. Like, that's just not okay. And likewise, trying to rewrite history isn't okay. Things happened in history that nobody is proud about. No one is proud about the fact the Holocaust happened, especially the Germans. No one is proud about the fact that the United States had slaves, except people who are, you guessed it, white supremacists. Like, that's the only people that they're a very small minority in society. Religious extremists. There was a lot of anti-Semitism towards Arabs for a long time, especially following the 9/11 attacks. That's not okay. Okay, I've been shot at by terrorists. It's not fun. I don't hate people that are Muslim. Like, that's just not okay. Islamophobia, for instance, I don't think that's okay. I don't hate people that follow Islam or anything. I don't hate Arabs. I don't hate anybody. Okay, I hate the people that did that stuff. I hate the extremists, and there's extremists in every religion. There are. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to be open about this. We don't, it's not something we want to reflect on. It's not about wanting to do something. It's about needing to do something. It's about, you need to do this. We need to understand history. History repeats itself for those that do not understand and do not study it. We see this with Russia. Russia is currently essentially repeating the exact setup of the entirety of World War II. You talk about the claims being made. If you look at Russian claims for taking over parts of Ukraine, then you take a look and you see you can essentially replace words in Hitler's speeches regarding taking over Austria and taking over Czechoslovakia and taking over Poland, and you could just replace Poland, Czechoslovakia, and whatever with Ukraine and Kyiv, and that's it. And it would be the same text. I've done it. I actually did it on here. There was somebody who commented, and I did that. And it was, and that's the thing. Like, you need to understand history. History repeats itself. You need to understand that things aren't all, hunky-dory in history. The Soviet Union is not the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. I think 2 world wars, the invention of the nuclear bomb, and also the extermination of millions of people is also probably, all of those are probably much worse than the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's the thing. You can't hate somebody. And you can't just say here, like with anti-Semitism, you can't just deny things happen. The Holocaust happened. Auschwitz is still there. You can still see the scratches in the walls. You can still see the scratches in the walls in the gas chambers where Jewish people and minorities and Poles and those with disabilities were executed using rat poison, Zyklon B. When I was in Syria, one of our posts was on top of an ISIS prison. You can still see the scratches in the walls from where the Islamic State tortured people. And there are still shell casings from where they executed them. But I just hate the Islamic State and terrorists. I hate extremism. I don't hate the people. The people there were awesome. They treated me with a bunch of respect. I've had the fortunate ability of talking to a Russian through my job. He works in the same field that I do. He is Russian. He's in the United States now, and he doesn't necessarily share the same beliefs I do. When it comes to everything, but the thing he stated was, I wish people would just talk to each other when it came to the war in Ukraine. I wish people would just talk to each other. And that really underlines the whole issue. Not understanding history, not reading history, not learning history and studying and going above what you're taught in school, but actually just learning it in general and understanding what actually happened. So when things like the Kremlin and specifically the State Duma state, the issue is that in Ukraine, they're not being taught the Great Patriotic War, they're being taught World War II, the red flag immediately goes up. Because that's something that the chairman in the State Duma stated. Officially, they posted it on their website. It was quoted on RIA News. So it's, and there are other instances in history too. The Trail of Tears, the forced movement of the Cherokee people, the Native Americans. This is not just about the Holocaust, unfortunately. This is focused on the Holocaust. It's a nice 68-page long report about this. They even cover memes. But you could easily say the same thing about so many situations in our world. And we need to understand that the first step to fixing a problem is admitting that there is one. And the problem is that we as humans are unfortunately not inherently good to ourselves and to our fellow people. There are a lot of things that are very controversial, and you may find some of the things I say may be controversial, and we try to walk a fine line, but the fine line stops when human dignity is at stake. And I find things such as calling people orcs and rats and skinnies and hajis and everything else that you could, every slander term you can imagine, I find that a lack of respect and dignity, which is why I will never allow it here on our community or our channel. And to go in the face of that would also go into the face of any kind of support that we would be doing and that we do for any of these humanitarian organizations. You can't do a good thing, or you can't do something bad for a good purpose and it still have meaning. I've run into that issue before, and I clearly stated it, and obviously things didn't go well, but here I am now, and I have my own platform, and I'm able to do that. So, with that rant over, please study history, and please be kind to your fellow human, because that is how we make the world a better place. You don't fight wars over differences, you have conversations. And having an open mind is extremely important, because having a closed mind and not being willing to listen as much as you're willing to talk is how we get to the points that we're at now. And with that, we jump into our last news topic of the night, and that is down here at the Kennedy Space Center, where the SpaceX Dragon capsule spacecraft did arrive at the International Space Station. It will remain attached and in orbit for roughly the next month until they are fully completed with loading it up with cargo and research, and also while they're offboarding cargo and research that they currently have on board the capsule for the newest experiments and supplies. So we do actually have the video from the NASA Kennedy Space Center where they saw the attachment and the successful first leg of the voyage. This space capsule will detach in about a month, and they will be splashing down off the coast of Florida. Take a look. So I think that's really cool. See, when I was a kid, my grandfather, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but my grandfather, he was fascinated by this and made me fascinated by it as a child. And I got to see the space shuttles when they were still flying the space shuttles. I got to see that dock with the International Space Station too, live, because I watched it through a telescope with him and a lot of stuff. So I find this stuff really fascinating. I think space is really cool. I love watching space, space related stuff. When it comes to play things like Kurzgesagt, which is also in a nutshell for those that it's in English. They have a lot of different languages, but Kurzgesagt's really awesome. They do a lot of really good animations and really dumb things down to a understandable level. I strive to be as good at simplifying things as them at some point in history, or at some point in time with this channel. But that is all of the news, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed. There's a lot of things here that we talk about that can be controversial, or unfortunately, as much as we try to stay apolitical, is political. And not everything you guys are going to see or hear from me is something that you may or may not agree with. I have no problem with a disagreement, and I have no problem listening to the disagreements. But I do ask that to maintain some kind of respect, and I am willing to keep an open mind to any point of view someone may have contrary to me. So that's fine. I just hope that you guys maintain that kind of level and respect and dignity for your fellow man. Unfortunately, a lot of times in this world, there are people that have sentiments or anti-Semitism. They are anti-Semitic, or there's a lot of bigotry and hatred towards especially select groups of individuals. Whether that you're talking about race or creed or orientation or gender or anything else. That's just, unfortunately, the world that we live in. But once again, understanding that and understanding that there is a problem is the first step to fixing that. So thank you for joining us on our channel. Thank you for keeping it very respectful here on the community and on the channel. And I hope it stays that way. And I hope that you guys will be back to join us tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central for another 24 hours worth of news. Please be sure to check out the video description. There's a ton of different organizations down there, so much so that we can no longer put descriptions with them because it actually makes it so we can't have we go past the character amount needed. That's a good problem to have. But please, if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, it sounds cheesy, but give us a like and subscribe and let your friends know about us, because the more people that are here, the more people, of course, can enjoy the news. But even more importantly than that, and really the whole cause of this channel, is to actually support organizations and charities and fundraisers, because we want to do good in this world. We want to be able to be the news that gets back. That only works with you guys. And if you have more organizations, like we added more today, we will continue to vet them. And we will continue to do so until we run out of character space, and then we will continue past that, because luckily for us, we have a website and we have a Discord, which is in the description below, where we can keep adding them even past the point YouTube won't let us. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never pushing merchandise. 100% of everything we do is for charities and for fundraisers. So thank you for supporting us in that endeavor. I hope you guys will continue to support us in that endeavor. Thank you for joining us. We're signing off for the night. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night, guys. Please stay safe, and if not, I hope your friends, family, and you find that safety and security in the very near future. Bye.
Слава Україні!